Word count, 4238. The men had already unhitched the widow's plow team when Elias Merrin stepped off her husband's fresh grave, wiped the red clay from her gloves, and said to Vernon Pike, "You've never met a woman like me." The Wyoming wind snapped the black ribbon at her throat. Behind the barn, a frightened mare hammered her hooves against the stall boards hard enough to rattle the whole side of the stable. Pike stood with his hat brim low and his two ranch hands smiling beside him, as if they had come to a picnic instead of a burial. In his hand was a folded paper with the county seal on it. In Ada's hand was the shovel she had used to lay the last of the dirt over Elias Merrin. Before we go further, settle in wherever you're listening from tonight, and let us know in the comments where you're with us from. There is something comforting in knowing how many lamps are lit out there while a story finds its way through the dark. Pike let his gaze travel from the shovel to her face. "Ma'am," he said, smooth as lamp oil, "I imagine grief has turned your mind toward theater. That paper says your husband borrowed against this ranch. I've come to collect." Ada looked at the paper, then at the men leading away her team. She did not raise her voice. "My husband never signed a thing without wetting the pen twice first," said a dry nib, made a poor promise. "If that paper is his, it'll show the second blot." That pulled the smile off one of the ranch hands. It put a flicker in Pike's eyes too, though he hid it quickly. No one in Bitterwash had ever accused Elias Merrin of softness. They had accused her of too much else. Too big-boned for delicacy. Too sharp for comfort. Too old, at 38, to have buried one husband and still wear that much fight in her shoulders. She had spent 14 years being looked through by men who asked her husband the price of hay while she held the ledger that decided whether the hay could be bought at all. Now Elias was in the ground. The paper in Pike's hand said the place belonged to him, and half the town had stayed after the funeral just to watch what the widow would do. Sheriff Tom Bell shifted from heel to heel near the fence, thumb hooked at his belt, eyes never quite meeting hers. He had a habit of rubbing the corner of his mustache when he was lying, and he was rubbing it now. "You have 3 days," Pike said. "After that, the herd, the house, the spring, and the north pasture pass to me lawfully. Sign peacefully, and I'll let you keep the parlor furniture." Ada's laugh came once, flat and joyless. "You can keep your mercy. It smells worse than the stock pens." A stranger near the wagon line turned his head then. He had been standing apart from the others, hat in hand, dark coat powdered with road dust, watching the whole exchange in silence. She had noticed him earlier at the funeral because he had not bowed his head when the preacher prayed. He had only looked at the coffin as if he knew too well what it sounded like when it shut on someone you still had things left to say. Pike tucked the paper back into his breast pocket. 3 days, Mrs. Merrin. Then you'd best use them well," Ada said. "Because when you come back, you'll need more men." The crowd made a sound then. Not speech. The sound people make when they sense trouble stepping out of the shape they expected. Pike tipped his hat and walked off. His men took the plow team anyway. Ada waited until they were gone before she let the shovel head drop into the dirt. It hit with a dull iron thunk. Only then did the weight of the day arrive in her knees. She did not fall, but she felt how close falling still lived in a body. The stranger approached at last. He had a narrow scar crossing one cheek, pale against sun-browned skin, and the careful stillness of a man who measured rooms before entering them. "Name's Eli Holt," he said. "I brought the freight wagon in from Laramie. Your husband ordered lamp glass 2 weeks back. Storekeeper said he'd settle later." Ada looked at him. "He won't. I figured as much." He held out a wooden crate wrapped in burlap. She took it because it was easier than refusing. His fingers brushed hers for the briefest moment. His hand was cold despite the afternoon sun. "What do you want, Mr. Holt?" "Nothing you owe me." His eyes moved toward the grave, then the barn, then the road Pike had taken. "But that paper," he flashed around. "It's trouble. Sheriff Bell was asking in town yesterday whether your husband could still write at the end." The skin at the back of Ada's neck tightened. Why would he ask that? Eli's jaw shifted once. Because he already knew the answer mattered. That night, after the mourners had gone and the house had gone too quiet, Ada sat at the kitchen table with Elias's old account books spread around her. The lamp hissed low. Coffee had burned black in the pot hours earlier, and the smell of it hung bitter in the room. She ran her fingertips over figures she knew by heart. Feed costs, rail charges, calving losses, dry months, better months. Her father had gambled away the family place in Nebraska when she was 12, and from that year on, numbers had stopped being marks on paper and become weather, hunger, safety, shame. She trusted them more than she trusted charm, titles, or a man smiling over a contract. There should have been a mortgage entry if Pike's paper was real. There was none. There was, however, a missing ledger. Not one she used often. One Elias kept separate in the false bottom flour bin, where he stored records tied to Pike's cattle contracts and water right disputes. Ada stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. She crossed to the pantry, shoved the bin aside, lifted the board. Empty. She stared into the dark cavity. Only a little white flour dust clung in the corners. Someone had known exactly where to look. When she turned, Eli Holt was standing on the porch outside the kitchen screen, shadowed by the lantern light. He had not knocked yet. He was giving her the chance to send him away before crossing the threshold. She opened the door with one hand on the shotgun behind it. "I saw 2 riders near your spring house," he said. "Not yours. Why are you still here?" "Because I've seen a man get buried and his land stolen in the same day. Once was enough." Ada studied him. "And what did you do the first time?" His face went still in a way that answered more than words could have. "Not enough." That was the first unanswered question she carried to bed. The second was worse. If Pike had the missing ledger, what exactly had Elias learned before he died beneath his overturned wagon on the North Road? By sunrise she had her answer, or enough of one to burn. Elias had broken his right hand 6 weeks before he died when a yearling kicked through the chute. From then until the end, he signed every receipt with his left, clumsy and slanted. Pike's paper, which Belle had foolishly let her see when he came at dawn to post formal notice, bore a neat right-handed signature dated 10 days after the break. Belle saw her notice it. He rubbed his mustache corner harder. "You can tell your boss," Ada said, handing the paper back. "That forged lies smell stronger in the morning." "He ain't my boss," Belle muttered. "No," she said. "That would require a spine." Belle flushed, then left. By noon the whole valley knew the widow had called the sheriff spineless to his face. Some laughed. Some shook their heads. Some warned her quietly that Pike owned half the notes in Bitter Wash and the other half of the men. It would have been easy then to do what sensible people expected. Pack what she could. Sell the milk cows. Take the train east to her married sister in Omaha. Live small. Survive. Instead, she saddled Elias's meanest mare, rode into town, and walked straight into Pike's bank office with mud on her hem and a rifle across her back. The teller, a pinched man who kept wiping the same brass rail though it shone already, froze when he saw her. Pike emerged from the back room smiling. "Mrs. Merrin," he said, "come to accept reality? I came to ask what sum you claim my husband borrowed." Pike named a number. Ada repeated it at once, then named the date, the rail shipment, and the cattle loss Pike had suffered that same week 3 years earlier when an early freeze thinned his southern herd. "Strange," she said. "That is the exact amount you were short before you bought Belle's house note." Pike's smile did not move, but his fingers did. One tap against the counter. Women remember strange things. The ones men ignore usually do. He leaned closer. "Take the furniture offer. Pride is expensive." She leaned closer too. "So is murder." The teller inhaled sharply. Pike's face hardened by 1 degree. It was enough. On the porch outside, Eli Holt waited by the hitch rail. "That was reckless," he said as she came out. "I know. It also worked. He's rattled." Ada mounted the mare. "Good. Let him learn a feeling. What's the plan?" She looked down at him, surprised by the question. "Since when are you part of one?" "Since I saw Belle at Pike's office before dawn." He met her eyes without flinching. "And since I recognized the stamp on that forged seal. I used to carry legal papers for men like him. Claims, liens, repossessions. I told myself paper was cleaner than a gun. Turned out it ruined people just as well." There was at last. His wound, plain enough to touch. Ada could have ridden off then. She worked better alone. Grief had made her sharp, but it had not made her foolish. Trust cost. Men with regrets were often just men who had arrived late to their own conscience. Instead, she said, "If you're staying, you'll do what I say on my land." A corner of his mouth almost changed. "Yes, ma'am." For the next day and a half, the valley held its breath. Ada moved like a woman laying track in front of her own train. She checked the spring gate, counted cartridges, pulled the hidden cash roll from the sewing basket beneath the mending, Sent young Noah Pierce from the next ranch over to ask at the telegraph office whether a circuit judge would be in Laramie by week's end. She went to old Mrs. Barlow, who had ears like wire snares and knew every whisper before supper, and asked what Pike had been doing on the North Road the day Elias died. Driving too fast for a man with no business there, Mrs. Barlow said, pushing her spectacles back up her nose with a floured knuckle. And Bell came home that night with mud to his knees. That gave Ada shape, if not proof. What it did not give her was the missing ledger. Late that afternoon, Eli found the first real clue in the barn loft. One of the floor planks had been forced up recently. Under it lay a torn page, not from the missing book, but from Elias's pocket notebook, the kind he used when he was away from the desk. On it, in his slanted left hand, were 5 words. Pike took Osgood shipment twice. Ada sat down on an overturned bucket when she read it. The barn smelled of hay dust and horse sweat. Swallows ticked through the rafters overhead. Osgood was a drover out of Casper, she said quietly. Died last winter. Eli crouched beside her. If Pike kept billing cattle under a dead man's brand, that's fraud enough to gut him. And enough reason to kill a man who found out. Eli nodded once. At dusk, as the sky went copper over the far ridge, Ada made the harder choice. There was enough hidden cash to buy train tickets and a month of boarding. Not a future, but a refuge. She could leave before dawn and spare herself the storm Pike was building. Instead, she wrapped the cash in oilcloth and handed it to Noah Pierce with instructions to ride it to his mother if the house burned. Widows, she told the stunned boy, should not be made in bunches. Then she turned to Eli. We take what we know to Laramie tonight. If Pike's bought Bell, he may not have bought the circuit judge yet. Eli looked at the darkening road. He'll watch the main trail. Then we don't take it. They left after moonrise with 1 horse and 1 mule, traveling the dry wash behind the cottonwoods where stones rolled under hoof and the air smelled of sage crushed cold under leather. Ada rode ahead. Eli followed with the satchel containing Elias's notebooks, the torn page, and every contract she could gather that bore Pike's name. Halfway to the ridge line, Ada lifted her hand. What? Eli whispered. She had heard it already. Not seen. Heard. A cinch buckle giving a tiny bright click in the dark. Riders above them. The first shot hit the mule's pack frame and split wood. The animal screamed. Down, Eli barked. They slid off opposite sides as more shots cracked from the ridge. Rock dust stung Ada's cheek. The night filled with the hot metal stink of gunfire. Eli fired once, then moved, short and fast, never staying where the sound of his own shot had fixed him. Ada did not waste bullets blind. She listened, counted breaths. 1 rider to the left, horse snorting hard. Another shifting shale on the right. The satchel. She crawled toward it on her elbows as rounds chewed dirt beside her. A hand caught her ankle. Eli, leave it. No. Ada, if we leave that satchel, he owns the story. Something in his face changed at that. He let go. She reached the mule just as another shot tore through the pack, and paper fluttered up like startled birds. Eli lunged from behind the scrub, hit 1 rider low, and both men went down in a spray of stone. Ada grabbed what she could, shoved loose pages into her coat, and ran bent double for the ravine shelf. Then she heard Eli make a sound no person mistook for anything but pain. He had been hit high in the shoulder. This is where I want to ask you something, because by now you know exactly what was on the table. If you were Ada, with proof blowing into the dark and riders closing in, would you have ridden for safety alone, or gone back for the man who chose your side when he could have saved himself? I know what you did. I wonder what you would have done. She went back. Not because she was noble in the tidy way storybook people are noble. Because leaving had been offered to her all her life by men who called it reason. Leave the account book to your husband. Leave the bargaining to men. Leave the grief inside where it doesn't make others uncomfortable. Leave while you still can. She was tired of leaving. She fired once at the horse above the ridge, not to kill it, but to wheel it. The animal shrieked and bolted sideways, taking its rider's aim with it. In that blink, Ada slid under Eli's arm, hauled him upright, and dragged him into the cut of the ravine while bullets snapped branches over their heads. The papers she had saved were damp with mule blood, and one was missing half a page. Behind them, one of Pike's men shouted, "Burn the rest." Orange flame bloomed where the shattered satchel lay. Ada felt something cold settle inside her then. Not fear, a steadier thing. They spent the rest of the night in an abandoned line shack up in the rocks, the kind built for herders in bad weather. Eli was gray-faced by the time they barred the door with a broken plank. Ada cut his coat away, found the furrowed wound, and cleaned it with whiskey while he held himself silent, so hard the muscles in his jaw jumped. The shack smelled of old smoke, mice, and pine pitch warmed from the day before. Outside, the wind worried the chinks between logs. "You should have left me," Eli said when she tied the bandage off. "No, you may yet wish you had." She sat back on her heels. "I've buried the only man I ever loved once already. I'm not taking orders from death tonight." That stilled him. For a while the only sound was the soft hiss of the lamp and Eli's breathing evening out by degrees. Ada took the saved pages from her coat. 2 contracts. 1 rail receipt. The torn notebook leaf. Not enough for court. Maybe enough for a town. Eli watched her. He burned the rest. "Yes. You still look like you're counting." "I am." He almost smiled. "Your husband told the feed merchant in Laramie you could remember a column after 1 glance." He talked too much. He sounded proud. Something in her throat tightened so suddenly she had to look away. "He was kind," she said. "That's rarer than people admit." After a time Eli said, "I had a wife. And a little girl." His voice was steady, but it came from a long way off. "A claim outfit I rode for put a family out in a March storm. I knew the papers were rotten. I served them anyway. Told myself it wasn't my business. On the ride back, I learned my own child had taken fever. She died before I got home. My wife lasted another winter with half her heart gone. Men talk about bullets because they are easy to point at, but shame will keep a truer aim." Ada sat with that. The lamp made a small gold pool between them. She took off the black ribbon from her throat and wrapped it once around the neck of the whiskey bottle to stop its rattle in the wind. "My father lost our place over cards," she said. "My mother scrubbed boarding house floors till her fingers split. Every time a man in a good coat smiled near a ledger, she'd start shaking. So I learned figures before I learned hymns. Then I married the first decent man I met and thought I had outrun old fear. Maybe you never do." Eli looked at the pages in her lap. "What now?" Ada traced the half-burned rail receipt with 1 finger. "Now I do what men like Pike never imagine a woman has been doing while they speak over her." She tapped her temple. "I kept the books." He frowned, then understood. The receipts, the cattle weights, the dates, the false shipments. She knew them. All of them. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Elias's eyesight started failing 2 years ago at dusk. So every night after supper, I read every contract, every bill of sale, every rail car number aloud while he checked the totals. Pike thought he was hiding things from my husband. He never noticed he was teaching me." Eli sat very still. Then he said the line she would remember for the rest of her life. "The world makes a habit of mistaking who is in the room. If this part is moving you, then you are exactly who stories like this are written for." A like and a subscribe tell us to keep bringing you people who fight their way back to themselves, 1 hard mile at a time. By dawn the bleeding had slowed. By noon they were back in Bitter Wash, not sneaking, but riding straight down the main road so everyone saw. Ada had washed the soot from her face, but not the blood from her sleeve. Let them see the cost. Eli rode stiffly beside her, pale but upright. Pike was already setting up the seizure on her land. Wagons stood in the yard. Bell had 3 deputies there. The townspeople had come with that strained look communities wear when they can smell shame and do not yet know whom it will belong to. Pike stood on the porch with a paper in hand, rehearsing righteousness. Ada dismounted slowly and walked through them all. "You're late," Pike said. "No," she said. "You started early." Bell stepped forward. "Mrs. Merrin, by authority of—" "Save your breath, Tom. You'll need it when folks ask what you were doing with mud on your knees the night my husband died." That hit the crowd like thrown grit. Heads turned. Pike smiled thinly. "Careful. Sorrow has made you imaginative." Ada climbed the porch until she stood level with him. "Then let us speak plainly. 3 winters back, you billed 112 head under Caleb Osgood's brand after the man was dead. 2 months later, you claimed a freeze loss on 47 of the same cattle to borrow against a note at First Territorial. Spring after that, you repeated the trick with the Harlan shipment out of Casper. Railcar 6-14B, paid twice. Once by freight claim, once by sale. The teller from the bank, standing near the gate, went white. Pike's expression did not change, but the smoothness went out of it. Nonsense. Ada kept going. Date after date. Weight after weight, brand after brand. The valley listened. Men who had once stood with hats in hand while Pike explained markets now stared at him as if seeing his face from a new angle. The feed merchant spoke up first, then the freight clerk, then old Mrs. Barlow, sharp as a tack, announcing she had seen Pike on the North Road after dark the night Elias died and would swear it before any judge still capable of hearing. Bell tried to cut in. Eli stepped beside him, one hand on his holster, not drawing, only reminding. Ada reached the last piece. And the note you hold bears my husband's right hand 10 days after that hand was broken. Tom Bell knows it. So do I. The silence that followed felt enormous. Pike recovered enough to sneer. Memorized accusations from a grieving woman and gossip from old hens. That's what you've brought me. No, Ada said. What I brought was you. She lifted the half-burned rail receipt. Not proof entire, but enough. Enough when joined to all the others. Enough when the town had finally heard the pattern aloud. Pike saw the turn before anyone else. He moved fast then, too fast for dignity, grabbing at the paper. Ada stepped back. He caught her wrist hard enough to bruise. Give me that, he hissed. Half the yard gasped because there is a moment when every community decides what kind of place it is, and sometimes it is no bigger than a man laying hands on a widow in daylight. Ada did not pull away. She drove her knee into Pike's thigh, hard. Exactly where Elias had once shown her a horsebreaker could drop a stronger man by taking his balance instead of his pride. Pike lurched. The receipt tore free. Eli drew then, but Ada was already moving. Pike went for his gun. So did she. The shot cracked across the yard and sent a flock of blackbirds up from the cottonwoods. Pike's revolver spun out of his hand and skidded off the porch steps. Ada held her own pistol steady, smoke lifting from the barrel. Her arm did not shake. You should have kept your hands to yourself, she said. For one heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Noah Pierce's mother, of all people, stepped forward from the crowd and said, clear enough for everyone. I'll testify. The bank teller swallowed and raised a trembling hand. So will I. After that, the town came loose all at once. Not brave, perhaps, but no longer willing to stay bought. The freight clerk spoke. One deputy took Bell's pistol. Mrs. Barlow began listing dates like scripture. Pike looked from face to face and saw his kingdom leaving him in pieces. He lunged for the porch rail as if he might still run. Bell took one step after him, then stopped when he realized there was nowhere left to stand that wasn't disgrace. By sundown, Pike was under guard in the jail he had once walked past smiling. Bell was in the cell beside him. The bank in Laramie sent for every book tied to Pike's operations. Within a month, liens were called, fraudulent claims opened, and cattle sold off not to expand his empire, but to satisfy the people he had cheated. The spring and the north pasture remained Ada's. The house remained Ada's. And because the law delights in small ironies when it bothers to work at all, the parlor furniture remained Ada's too. That evening, after the yard had emptied and the shadows turned blue under the fence rails, Eli found her sitting on the porch steps with Elias's hammer in her lap. She had taken the black ribbon off for good. It's done, he said. The first part is. He lowered himself carefully beside her. The boards were still warm from the day. Somewhere in the pasture a mare blew softly through her nose, content now. What about the second part? He asked. Ada looked out toward the spring house, the barn, the grave beyond the rise. Learning what to do with a world that didn't end after all. He nodded as if that was an answer worthy of handling gently. After a while she said, you could stay on till your shoulder mends. Could. And after? He looked down at his hands. After is usually where things go thin for me. Ada considered that, then leaned the hammer against the post. Then we might as well build it before it has the chance. Months later, the first snow came early and soft. Not a punishing storm. Only a clean white settling over the fences and the cottonwoods and the fresh-painted barn doors Eli had hung with his own hands. Inside the kitchen, coffee steamed on the stove while Ada stood at the table teaching Noah Pierce how to square a ledger properly, so numbers quit trying to sneak off the page. Eli came in with snow on his hat and a cedar cradle under one arm for Mrs. Pierce's new baby, and Ada looked up at him with that rare, unguarded smile that seemed less like happiness arriving than like a door finally deciding to stay open. Strange, she thought. How a life can be stolen from you in one season and returned in another with more room in it than before. Outside, evening gathered blue and gentle around the house, and the lamplight lay gold across the snow like something warm enough to live by. Next time, we'll tell the story of a deaf seamstress sent west because her brothers called her useless, and the one-handed rancher who learned her silence held more courage than all the men in his valley combined.